In today's conversation, today's guest is one who writes raw honesty, fierce vulnerability, and a voice that resonates deeply. Abby Rosemarin has spent the last 9 years as a professional writer, with her work featured in publications like Huffington Post, Bustle, Thought Catalog, Elite Daily, and many more. A former model and current grad student, Abby has navigated the complex terrain of trauma recovery, self discovery, and learning to truly enjoy her own company. She's the author of Ballerina's Guide to Boxing, Venom, and other independent published works. And now she's back with a powerful new book, The Year of Dating Myself: How My Solo Tour Healed More Than Just My Heartbreak, released on July 8th, 2025. In this episode, we're going to dive into the healing power of solitude and the art of writing through pain and what it really means to date yourself. Abby, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Good to have you on. This is an important topic. I know a lot of people have dealt with trauma in their life, and so you're going to help us all out and solve all of our problems. Looking forward to this.
Exactly. At the end of this podcast, everyone's going to be healed.
Everybody's going to be healed. We like that. We like global healing. So this is a great thing. So Abby, I'm going to ask you my favorite question. Tell me the best piece of advice you've ever received.
Ooh, the best piece of advice I have ever received. Honestly, I think the one that, and it's as cliched, we hear it everywhere, but healing is nonlinear.
Mm,
And specifically, I remember this was one piece of advice that one of my friends was giving me where I said, I feel like I'm just going in circles right now, especially in terms of this particular healing. And they gave this great metaphor of, well, it can look like you're going in circles, but really it's like you're on a spiral staircase. And every time you make that orbit, you've technically gone up another floor and up another floor, and your perspective is changing and you're getting a chance to see more of the ground. And, eventually you'll make your way to the top. And to this day, that little piece of insight as an addendum to that advice has stuck with me.
that's good. I like that because as long as you feel like you're making progress, it's a little easier every day to kind of get up and keep going forward. But if you feel like you're just kind of stuck in one place, it's so hard to be motivated to keep pushing through it all.
Percent. And it really can then feel like, am I just doing all of this work just to end up at square one again? But I always have to remind myself, like, I am not the person I was a year ago. And even if it's felt like I've gone in circles sometimes or taken 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, really, I haven't. I have been making this pretty cool path. It's just, it doesn't look like a point A straight line, point B.
Right, exactly. And few things in life do work that well, right?
Oh, 100. I don't think I can think of anything that really works that way in like a nice
Right.
straight headphone cords aren't even a straight line.
Right. So you've been writing professionally for nearly a decade, and that's impressive. I got to tell you. But what first drew you to writing as a form of expression, really?
That is something that I have been doing since before I was even literate. One of my favorite stories to share is that when I was younger, I would write stories and I put that in heavy quotes because I would draw a picture on one side of the piece of paper and on the other side was quite literal scribbles because you're talking 4 or 5 years old where these letters don't really mean anything to you. They are scribbles. So I would be writing stories, but it was, just literally little back and forth scribbles. And really from there, it just kept growing. I always kept a diary on hand, and from diaries became journals, which really I feel like a journal is just a diary who's graduated high school. And really from there, again, it just kept growing where if I could put words to my experience, it felt palatable, it felt digestible. Not just the negative stuff, but the positive stuff as well. Like if I can document it in words, suddenly this very abstract and non-linear experience becomes very linear and non-abstract.
I love that. I'm a writer myself, and I love to write in very different forms. And so my newest book is a narrative telling about organizational change. But I'm curious, you've written from essays to fiction. How do you determine what genre, what form the writing is going to take to best tell your story?
Honestly, it's a chaos mode. I wish I could say there's a rhyme or rhythm to it. I think it is whatever is really inspiring me at the moment. I know for my collections of poetry, that was during a very specific time. It says a lot that my two collections were published within like 2, 3 years of each other, and I haven't done one since. Because at that time, what channeled my experience the most, what felt like for me at least, the most efficient way, the most authentic way was poetry. Sometimes it's leaning into more nonfiction and directly telling my story. Sometimes it's leaning into fiction. And, try as we might to make stories that are, not based on ourselves. Any fiction writer can say a little piece of you is always in there. And some form.
Very true. So let's talk about your new book. That's what we came on to talk about. I'm dying to get into it. The Year of Dating Myself. What inspired the book, and what does dating yourself mean to you?
Man, so the book in a lot of ways was something that I thought about a month into the year of dating myself, where I realized I really wanted to document as much in real time this experience. And again, writing has been the way that I take these very abstract experiences and I make them linear. My thinking really was I'm going to write this everything in real time, almost treat it more like a journal than I am going to be anything else, and at the end of the year, I will pare it down, make it a nice digestible manuscript. And, it was one of those cases where I feel like the universe kind of conspired for me because I was thinking in the back of my head, like, I wonder how I'm going to bring this up to my agent about, like, hey, I'm writing this year of dating myself, and eventually I want to make it into like a polished manuscript and get it published. What are your thoughts? And I swear she must have sensed a disturbance in the force because maybe an additional month or two later, I get an email from her because she knew about the year of dating myself. And she said, "What are your thoughts on writing a book about this?" And I was like, "Oh, honey, do I have the good news for you?" And yeah, and make sure to answering the part about what dating myself means. For me, it really is about taking that devotion and care that we would give to a romantic partner and making sure that we give it to ourselves. And I think that's something we can do regardless as to whether or not we're single or in a relationship. What is all of this energy that especially for someone like me who's very codependent, I would just orbit around the other person, I would lose my sense of self. What is it like to give myself a few moments to be the center of that orbit and take care of myself the way that I used to, take care of a partner?
That's great. So you've broken your book down into really 12 chapters. Every part of your book is broken down to a month of the year. So for those who kind of like trying to figure out how that's laid out. Um, so as you look at, I'm looking at this at the chapter, different pieces. Is there a month that stands out in your journey more than any other?
I think for me, it was October because up until then, there was always these feeling of, a lot of the year of dating myself was more or less in response to leaving a bad relationship. I mean, that's a simplified answer. It was a lot of almost a lifetime's worth of decisions that got me up to doing the year of dating myself. But up until about September or so, I still had this orbit around my previous relationship, which, anybody who has dealt with really bad heartbreak, especially if they were getting out of a toxic situation, can attest like that's very easy to do. And for me, this was like learning to swim for the first time because beforehand, if I was leaving a bad romantic situation, I would just get into another romantic situation. That is how I had dealt with mistreatment or infidelity, well, I maybe throw my hands up for maybe a month and dramatically say, I'm never dating again, and then hop right into a relationship before that month is out. And all of a sudden, here I am single, and I gotta learn how to process a relationship for the first time, really. And on top of that, process all the previous relationships that I had been running from. So there was this orbit for the first like 9 or so months, and very, very long story short, something that fever finally broke, and it felt like October was the first time that things were no longer a response to my pain, and it could be something way more than.
How difficult is it to be so transparent about your heartbreak and trauma? I know writing a book, it's I always describe it as you're giving birth to this child and you're putting this child out in front of the world and you're asking the world to love it. So how is it when it's such a personal story?
It is a double-edged sword because on the one hand, there can be a lot of validation when people say like, "Man, what you went through is something what I went through, and you put to words to something that I couldn't put words to." And that feels really amazing. On the flip side, we do live in the age of these very heightened parasocial relationships, and honestly, those are more usually more negative than anything else because people will then think, "Well, I know all this personal stuff about this individual, this writer. I am of authority to judge their life and judge their decisions and make value judgments on them as a person." And that can really that's incredibly uncomfortable. And that's enough for me to go, that's it. Nope, not sharing anything else with the world ever again. Because it is just like, these are people who have like a 1% snippet of my life and feel like they can be authorities on the matter. And those are those moments where it really kind of catches up with me, like, man, these are really vulnerable, and it exposes me in a way that leaves me vulnerable. And so when people are making these value judgments, whew, those can strike. And yeah, that's when it gets a little more complicated.
As I'm thinking about you telling this story and being out there in the world now, have you run across people that have read your book and how do I say and use those stories like when they're trying to date you? I'm just kind of curious as, oh, I read chapter so and so, and here's some insights I've discovered.
My goodness, thankfully, no. I was already a couple months into the relationship that I'm in now when the book was released, and I remember even sharing it with my boyfriend of like, honestly, sending the link to the book to you was one of the more vulnerable things that I've done so far. Like, I would have rather, as crude as it sounds, I would have rather farted in front of you than share this, because this is like, oh my god, here, learn about my dating life and all the mistakes I've made and all the times that I've been codependent and toxic. But so I remember when he of course got a copy, and thankfully has never been a case of like, oh, I'm going to use this information to try to like get a what up or anything like that. But there would be times where he would text me and actually be able to share parallel stories, where it has nothing to do with dating, but there's one part where I talk about getting my childhood toys from my childhood house and getting a chance to kind of reconnect with those toys. And he was like, let me tell you about the time that I did basically the same thing and got a chance to reconnect with all my Hot Wheels. And it was just like, it was an additional bonding moment, if you will.
Oh, that's neat. So, as you think about dealing with trauma, what lessons did this journey give you insights that you can share with other people who are maybe going through similar types of trauma in their dating relationships?
I mean, the biggest one and the simplest one is I am way stronger than I thought. I have way more capabilities than I thought. I went into this very, very codependent, didn't think I could go through the world without a relationship shielding me, if you will. And realizing like, no, I can do this. And also, I think the lesser talked about part of these kind of journeys is once you are no longer, because those who've gone through trauma can attest that sometimes it can feel like that's your identity. Like, the number one thing about me is the stuff I've been through that has, given me all my dings and dents and what have you. And then when you kind of start moving past that, you almost get this like, okay, now what? This is wide open space and this is scary. And I think a lot of people will have I know for me, this was the case, almost this panic of like, well, what is my identity now? But knowing that it gets to be that part's just as much of the journey as anything else, and learning that, there that identity discovery will be just as ongoing. And if anything, that it's a beautiful moment when that shift from I'm orbiting my trauma, my identity is primarily my trauma, and it flips over to I get to figure out what my identity is. I get to learn about my identity, like, is such a liberating moment.
I have to imagine that being a model had some impact on your identity and your self worth issues and your public persona. How did that impact all those things, especially as you're kind of navigate through dating as well?
It's and I was actually just telling my partner exactly this, where for me, it would feel like it was a liability in the dating world. I had one person I dated way back in the past who said, I could absolutely hate you. And I'd still date you because you're so hot. And I think that was supposed to be a compliment. But all I heard was, man, I can't even trust that the guy dating me even likes me, because he might hate me, but because I'm hot, he's going to keep dating me. So there was that element of this liability, and this weird, like, paradoxical, I don't even know what to call it, like suspended animation when it comes to those looks, where especially in the modeling world, yes, that's sought after. And when you're getting the jobs, you're getting paid well because of your looks. And also you are criticized to the high heavens. Even weights at my skinniest, I was at like 125 pounds at 5'10", that is real thin, especially for someone of my frame. And still, proportionally speaking, I was closer to at least what the early 2000s idea of plus size was than I was to actual industry standard. And so you're kind of carrying that judgment and that criticism over your head at all times. And then also going into this dating world where you're considered so hot that a guy could hate you and he still will want to date you. And that is such a lethal combination. And in some ways, I look at those two things combining, and it's like, man, no wonder that I end up in the situations that I ended up in.
So, in your solitude and self love part of your journey, how did you kind of solve some of the things that you were in conflict with in your life?
I mean, I think a really big one was recognizing I could do it on my own, and recognizing that my company is worth appreciating. And that's not to say like something super egotistical, like I'm the best thing in the world and people should, kiss the ground I walk on. But wants me to have them in my life and be company in their life, it's something to be appreciated. Like to learn to enjoy my own company helped me internalize the idea that yeah, that this company is enjoyable and that deserves a level of compassion and respect and consideration in order to have that company in their lives. And before that, especially not being comfortable being alone, which basically meant I was not did not care much for my own company. I would be bending over backwards and destroying myself trying to prove myself worthy of somebody else's company. And I think that was the hugest growth point for me was what was, wow, being alone is showing me that like my company, I really enjoy my company. And if I'm gonna have someone else in my life, I want them to enjoy my company too and demonstrate that they enjoy my company.
That's really insightful. So now you're currently a grad student and you're returning to academia. And how's that impacting your writing and your personal growth?
I'd be lying through my teeth if I said it doesn't impact it in terms of like your ability to kind of have your own kind of personal writing because the same way personal reading goes right out the door because now you're reading all these textbooks, kind of same deal. Like when you've got this like 15-page paper to crank out in a couple of nights, it's really hard to then shift gears and say journal about your week. But it's still something that I try my best to at least return to if for no other reason than for myself, especially with this book out. And I've heard this is really common with people who write memoirs. And once they're released, there's a part of them that goes, my God, this vulnerable part of me is out there and you kind of shell up. And that's definitely been the case. But it's also been kind of nice because now if I'm writing, I'm writing for myself as opposed to, man, I wonder how I'm going to get this published later on down the line.
So, speaking of publishing, as an independent, published several books, what has that journey been like for you to self publish?
Man, that was a journey. The best way to put it. I remember the first time I decided to, and this was kind of on the heels of writing for Thought Catalog, which at that point I did get a few collections published through them because they had a book publishing arm at that point. They might still do. It's just we're talking 2014. I had this moment of like, you know what? I really want to do something for myself, and it was kind of pushed further by in my personal life at the time my father was dying and I think I needed that project and venturing into the world of releasing something on my own. Whew, what a project. And it really showed me how many steps are involved in getting something out there. And especially at that point where there wasn't a ton of resources, the way that, these days you can go on Kindle Direct Publishing and they have layouts and formatting that they'll do for you. And back then I was, measuring margins with a ruler so I could figure out how to measure the margins on Word so I could format it properly. But as the years progressed and, I would always give the traditional publishing world a fair shake before then releasing it on my own. And, it got a little easier and little easier. You start getting into a rhythm. And then, you know, I, if anything, releasing something a little more traditionally, having an agent and getting a chance to do that more traditional rounds of querying and what have you kind of showed me like, wow, there's a lot of stuff that I finally don't have to worry about anymore. But because I've been doing this like lion's share of the load, like I feel prepared for the things that kind of get brought my way in terms of like the editing and the communications and the more promotion side of things where, it's like, all right, I'm prepared for this part.
So, what advice do you have for people, indie authors who are thinking of self publishing? Got best practices for them to look into?
I'd say the biggest one is make sure other people are reading it first. Outside eyes. Make sure you're getting outside eyes. And if you can afford it, a professional editor. If you can't afford it, but you've got friends who, are very literary minded and are willing to give you that kind of feedback and are okay with kind of trading it off for maybe a barter system where it's like, yeah, I'll edit your thing and you'll do X, Y, and Z, or, I don't know, buy me lunch a couple of times, do it because those outside eyes are needed. We know what we're writing when we're putting down on paper. Other people aren't inside our minds. And so when we are editing our piece, we have no idea like really what it's going to look like for someone outside of our brain. And kind of similarly, once you finish that project, as exciting as it might be to jump right on into the publishing process, sit on that work for a little bit. Give it, as excited as you might be, give it some time, because that is your baby right now. And like all parents to their children, they're perfect. Give it some time, let that fervor die down, and then you're able to kind of look at it with a fresh set of eyes, whether that's a couple of months, 6 months, who knows, but giving yourself that chance to make that baby, if you will, as good as it can be before it's brought out.
That's really helpful. I wish I had done more of that on my current book, but it's great. So, what kind of feedback are you getting on your book?
So far it's been really positive. It's been really exciting to see, a lot of people who have been in situations where they realized that they were codependent, or they got out of a bad relationship and realized, oh Jesus, I don't know how to be single, and getting a chance to just kind of see like, oh, wait a minute, this is possible. And I mean, that's been my biggest thing for this book, is being able to say like, or you say like, hey, listen, this is doable. Like, I thought I was never going to break out of my codependent shell, and there is life outside of, relationship hopping.
That's awesome. So, what's next for you creatively?
Well, the funniest thing is, because I've gotten very, like, I'm in that shell stage. A lot of it really is learning to do stuff kind of for me, and I think there was a little bit of that part too, was learning to not just write because I'm gonna pitch it to Huffington Post, or pitch it to my agent and get it out there. It was writing, writing for me. The craziest thing is I've kind of shifted gears. I've been learning how to play guitar and piano, and for no other reason than I want that for myself. Like, literally, I can count on one hand the number of people who have heard me play. And the only person who's heard me play in person and not like over FaceTime has been my partner. This is very personal. It's something that's for me. And it's cool because, again, especially since I have been writing for as long as I have, and publishing for as long as I have, there can be this like constant external referencing. And now it's just like, well, here are these really big creative endeavors and creative expression that I get to see what it's like to do it just because it's for me.
That's great. So, I love to ask my guests this question: what do you want your legacy to be?
My legacy, it's so funny because I mean, I immediately think Hamilton, of one of those last lines where it's like, legacy, it's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. And I remember for the longest time, I cared so much about legacy and how will I be remembered. And of course, recognizing that a lot of what we do will not be individually brought back towards us. Within a couple of generations, again, that garden has bloomed and we're long gone, and no one remembers who planted those seeds. But to kind of beat that metaphor to the ground, being the one who can plant at least as many of those seeds of kindness, of being unafraid to explore ourselves, and including those kind of darker and ickier parts that are usually not fun to have to explore. Being able to plant those seeds of doing the work to try to be the best kind of person we can be. I think that's my kind of legacy.
I love that. So, in season 6, we have a new thing now. It's a surprise question. So, pick a number between 1 and 5 for your surprise question.
All right, 4.
All right, this is great. So, what is the most disappointing text you've ever received?
Man, I don't know if it's the most disappointing text ever, but this was actually somebody that I had not necessarily started a relationship with, but we were, getting that ball rolling in terms of dating. And this is effectively last year, where my friend had introduced me to one of her friends. It's just, no, you guys would be great for each other. She essentially gives us each other's numbers, and we spend probably 2, 3 weeks just texting up a storm. Man, the vibes are there. The connection is there. Our schedules aren't lining up just to get to go on a date, but if anything, that's giving us more time to get to know each other. And I'm not on any dating apps at this point, and I will say that this kind of like organic introduction, it hits different than if you're just chatting someone up on Hinge for like 3 weeks. We finally have our first date. Man, we hit it off, like, to the point that at the end of our first date, we are scheduling our second date, and our second date's going to be like 2 days later. That is just how amped up we are. And the original that plan for that second date was like, he would come by and he would pick me up from my place, which for me is that's a very vulnerable act. I don't usually let people who are like had just started dating know where I live just yet because, safety issues. And I remember that morning I sent him my address and I'm like, I, can't wait to see you later that day. And the response back to that was, Abby, I can't do this. I'm not over my ex yet. I'm sorry to waste your time. Man, I went from preparing for this date, super excited. Yeah, we're going to, we were going to go out salsa dancing. We're going to do this thing. Yeah. And just like, whew, deflated. And that really like, my friends have heard me say that I basically was in a sadness orbit for a while after that, because that really took the wind out of my sails. But again, everything ends up working out for a reason. And if anything, I'm grateful for that really disappointing text, because if that hadn't happened, it wouldn't have cleared the space for me to not even honestly a couple of months later meet the man who is my partner to this day.
Neat. Well, it's a sad story, but it's a neat ending to that story. So, where can people find your book and connect with you on social media?
Yes. So my book is everywhere that books are sold online. If you like Amazon, you can get off of Amazon, Target, Walmart, Barnes and Noble. If Books a Million is still a thing, then Books a Million. If you would prefer to just get it straight off the Simon and Schuster website, that's also an option too. The best way to reach me is actually on my website, Abby Rose Marin dash. That was my Boston accent trying to sneak in a little bit there, and I kind of nipped it in the bud. But yeah, abbyrosemarin-author.com. Social media, you can get me on Instagram at Abby Rosemarin. And yeah, those are the two main ways.
Abby, thank you for sharing your story with such honesty and grace. Your journey reminds us that healing isn't linear and that solitude can be one of the most powerful forms of self love. Your words are a gift, I think, to my audience and for me to be a whole on their own. If today's conversation has resonated with you, you can grab Abby's new book, The Year of Dating Myself. It's more than a memoir, it's a road to rediscovering your strength and maybe, just maybe, a time for yourself, take yourself on a solo date. So, Abby, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Well, thank you so much for having me.